Hello friends, Brian here, back again for another quick video. This one has been prompted by a couple of things. One thing has been the response to my recent videos. After a fairly long gap, I have come back to making videos about tarot, and I'm very grateful to you for your positive response to that. So that's one thing. The other thing is, I recently spent some time with some friends and they quizzed me about my tarot reading habits, my interest in tarot. There, as many friends are of course fascinated by the concept of tarot, what it is, what it does, why I'm interested in it, how I got into it, and what my take on it is. And so I thought I would do a video on exactly that topic, my take on tarot. What do I think it is? How do I think it works? What do I think is important about it, etc., etc. And this is just going to be a very kind of off-the-cuff riff on the subject of tarot. One of the things that I think surprises my friends, or perhaps confounds them a little bit, is that they know that my approach to tarot tends to be coaching based. So I have designed courses on tarot coaching. I have written about tarot coaching. I teach tarot coaching. I use tarot coaching, and by tarot coaching I mean a combination of tarot reading techniques and life coaching skills combined together in a single approach, a single modality, which I find to be really, really powerful in terms of helping either myself if I'm reading for myself, or another person if I'm reading for somebody else, to move on purpose from inspired insights to real results. So it's an approach that I find to be very proactive, very forward thinking, and very empowering. And so my friends and others know me as the guy who does this combination of tarot coaching. And so the assumption then is that I have a very practical, down-to-earth view of the tarot, that I think it's not some kind of mystical thing. It's very straightforward. It's a tool. It's a kind of a bit like flashcards that you can use to inspire yourself to move forward, etc., etc. And to some extent that's true. To some extent that is one of the ways that I see the tarot. But the truth is, I am not averse to the idea of tarot being something really quite mysterious and even mystical. I can hold both of those apparently contradictory ideas in my head at the same time, as I can many other apparently contradictory ideas. And I love the fact that I can approach tarot from a number of different angles and feel empowered to approach it from a number of different angles that I don't need to choose. And I'll say a bit more about that in a second. But I've shared the story of how I discovered tarot before, but it bears repeating here, just so you perhaps have a sense of why I have my particular take on tarot. So like many people in the UK, I was aware of tarot originally from a couple of quite famous sources. One was the James Bond film Live and Let Die, where the character Solitaire, played by Jane Seymour, is a tarot reader. And so I was aware of tarot cards from that movie. I think that's from about 1971 or something. And also from a TV series in the UK called Tales of the Unexpected, which is based on the original series anyway. The first season of it was based on short stories written by Roald Dahl. Very macabre, bizarre, twist in the tail type stories, some really quite scary, and it was a staple of 1970s and early 80s television here in the UK, and it was just one of these things that everyone watched. And in the title sequence for that, you can look it up on YouTube, you can see tarot cards spinning on a kind of carousel. The one J.J. Swiss tarot, I think it is. And so I was aware of tarot, and obviously I'd heard about tarot, and I've always had a love of things a bit witchy and mysterious and spooky and so on. So I was aware of tarot. but hadn't ever really encountered the cards directly until I went to university, and a friend of mine who lived in the room, or our room above me in my hall of residence, she had a deck of cards, and I think they were the 1JJ Swiss or a variation. It was one of these decks that came as a kind of a pack in a kind of how to read tarot kind of thing. It wasn't a terribly kind of esteemed deck or anything. It was a fairly cheap, probably an imitation knockoff kind of deck. I don't mean an imitation in the sense of being fake, but I mean just one of these mass-produced, mass-published decks that came with a how to read tarot book, and we would sit and we would try to read the tarot cards to each other and for ourselves. We had to use the book. She knew a bit about tarot, a bit more than me. She'd been doing it for a bit longer, but not much more. And so we kind of muddled through together, interpreting the cards and trying different layouts and different spreads. What was interesting to me right from the get-go was that even without looking in the book, and bear in mind, if I'm right and my memory serves me correctly, and it was the 1JJ Swiss, we're talking about a Pip Deck, so the numbered cards did not have illustrated scenes on them. They were, the 10 of Swords was literally 10 swords arranged in a pattern, or, 8 of Wands was 8 wands arranged in a pattern. So there was nothing in the numbered cards to really hint at their meaning. Obviously, the court cards, to some extent, you could extrapolate meaning from them just based on the combination of the Knight of Swords, perhaps looking like somebody who might be going into battle, or the King of Wands looking like somebody who might be wielding a rod of iron in rulership. So there were things you could extrapolate from the court cards, and the majors, of course, death, the tower. From those you could extrapolate meaning just from the pictures, but not really the pip cards. But what I noticed really early on was, well, first of all, that if I just pulled cards out of interest, show me something interesting, a very kind of vague approach, not very much happened in my mind. But if I came at the cards with a specific question about a particular topic in my life, or about something I wanted to know more about, then whichever card showed up, even if it was a pip card, a numbered card, I found myself having a response, quite a visceral response, and quite a meaningful response, even if the cards were quite abstract, like a numbered card. So, for example, if I wanted to know something about how I was at university at the time, so most of my questions were either about studying or friendship and all that kind of stuff. So if I wanted to know how a particular course of study was going, and I pulled the 10 of Swords, although I didn't know what the 10 of Swords meant, unless I looked up the book, I would have a reaction to that card. I would see the swords, they're all kind of crisscrossing, lots of cuts being implied, and I would have a reaction to that. So I was fascinated by the fact that the tarot, when coupled with a question, the cards and the question together would help me form an impression in my mind, usually of further questions to ask or feelings to explore. And so this fascinated me about tarot, and so I went and bought my very first deck, which was Tarot of the Old Path, which is a Rider-Waite-Smith clone. I didn't know that at the time. I didn't even know there were different tarot systems at the time. But I got that deck, and of course that was a slightly different experience because it did have illustrated numbered cards, illustrated pip cards, which helped me then to understand the meanings as they were presented in the book, which were based very much on the Rider-Waite-Smith meanings, intertwined with some Wiccan philosophy. And so that's really how my exploration of tarot began, and it continued to fascinate me as I explored it further, and all the way through when I've been reading tarot over many years now. Where are we now? So close to 32 years, in fact probably 32 years around about this time, because I went to university in late 1991, and here we are in 2023, so almost 32 years of reading tarot. And all the way through, what I've found is that I have maintained this understanding that that tarot kind of exists on a spectrum. So on the one hand, I think it is possible to see tarot as a very mundane tool which acts almost as a kind of visual prompt to your own thinking, and could even be interpreted as, whichever question you take to a tarot card reading, whatever cards come out, you're going to get some useful prompt to expand your thinking. And there's nothing mysterious, nothing mystical about it. It's just a psychological reaction to what you're seeing, which helps your mind to open. I can absolutely vibe with that interpretation of tarot. All the way through to the idea that there is something more than that happening, that there is some kind of synchronous meaning behind the cards that come out in relation to a particular question. I can vibe with that too. And I love that I've been able to maintain this broad-based approach to my exploration of tarot, because it's meant that I've not become, I hope anyway, not become limited and hidebound in my interpretation of tarot. And I know that lots of people, probably some people who are watching this, will disagree heartily with me, because we just need to look online. We can see that there are different loyalties within the tarot community. Some people are absolutely wedded to the idea that tarot is some kind of mystical, powerful entity in its own right, and others who think it's not that at all. And there are different systems. So some people love the Marseille system, and they kind of sneer at the more kind of esoteric systems like the Rider-Waite-Smith deck or the Thoth deck or any of the hundreds, thousands of other decks that have followed since. There are those who only read esoteric tarot and who think that tarot can only really be interpreted if you're actually applying esoteric thinking to it. So if you're using some of the Kabbalistic associations or astrological associations, etc., etc., and then within that camp you have people who will argue about which system is best. Did Arthur Edward Waite have it right, or did Aleister Crowley have it right, or does somebody else have it right? And all the nuances and differences between different systems, and people will spend hours picking them apart and trying to stick up for their own particular approach. And on the one hand, it's great fun, and there's not really a problem with that. On the other hand, one of the things I see sometimes is that new tarot readers are put off by this kind of expectation that you've either got to come down in one camp or another, or you have got to try and learn everything so you can understand it all, and none of that is true. So I think what we need to remember is that ultimately tarot is a game. That's what it started as. The cards started life as a card game, and the truth of the matter is that you can divine, as in see meaning, even in the most mundane card game. So you could get a deck of ordinary playing cards, the kind that you would play snap and whist and cribbage and bridge and canasta and all that kind of thing with. And if you have a particular mindset when you're looking at the cards, you could divine, and many people do divine meaning from those cards, some of whom do so simply by looking at the cards and forming impressions based on what they're seeing, and others by applying a system, by seeing the hearts as meaning something, the diamonds as meaning something, the joker as meaning something, etc., etc. So it's possible to divine using a card game, and tarot is a case in point, because people will have started divining with tarot long before there were any kind of esoteric associations. And then, we have the esotericism beginning to come in a bit more formally. So we have, Atelia in the 1700s and Eliphas Levi in the 1800s, and then the Golden Dawn, Arthur Edward Waite and Aleister Crowley in the early 1900s applying their own esoteric take on tarot, and that whole kind of esoteric tarot explosion, which really, of course, took off with the Rider-Waite deck. This is my oldest tarot deck, not the one I've had longest. The one I've had longest is, as I say, is the Tarot of the Old Path, which I got in 1991. This deck is, I think, this variation of the deck is from about 1971, but the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, of course, is from the early 1900s, and it is still the most popular deck in the world. I think there's a good reason for that. I think that's partly because the thing I love about the RWS deck is that some of its esoteric meaning is quite subtly encoded into the deck. There are other decks that are much more overt in their esoteric meaning, and certainly those decks that incorporate astrological symbols or overtly Kabbalistic symbols are very clearly esoteric. The Waite-Smith deck, those symbols are in there, or representations of those symbols are in there, but they're a bit more subtly encoded, and I think that's one of the reasons that deck is so popular. But the reason I'm rambling on about this is just to say that in my tarot world, all of this is valid. All of it's valid. So if you want to look at tarot as strictly a game which you can either divine with or not, that's absolutely fine. If you think tarot needs to have an esoteric flavor to it to be really meaningful and to help your readings, that's fine. If you want it to be the Golden Dawn system, or an earlier system, Oswald Wirth or Atelia or Levi or any other esoteric system, that's all valid. If you do want to go down the route of the more kind of Kabbalistic, ceremonial magic influenced, Golden Dawn influenced, if it's Rider-Waite-Smith, that's great. If it's Thoth, that's great. If it's something else, that's great. You don't have to try to find the one that is the perfect system, other than the perfect system for you. And, I'll be honest, I get kind of tired and just don't bother spending much time engaging with those who try to pin down one system as being better than all the rest and then decry other people for liking another system. I just think, who's got time for that? Not me. So it's all good. It's all good. And tarot can evolve apart from anything else. There are some who really turn their noses up at the esoteric adjuncts that have been added into tarot. But the way I look at that is, if you think about films, think about movies. If filmmaking had not evolved, we would still be watching black and white silent films. Things evolve, things can be added to systems, and it doesn't make them more or less than what was there originally. We have all of that from the past, and we have what's been added in the future. So in that sense, I think, we really do ourselves a disservice if we discount everything that's happened in the past, and equally if we discount what's been added in the present day and across all the years, and what will be added in the future. So that's kind of my view of the world. And I know some will think, well, you're just not coming down on one side of the fence or the other, but I don't care. I'm quite happy being on the fence, looking around at the vistas all around me and being able to draw from them whenever I want to. And I think that's my way of doing it, and you're entitled to your way too. One more thing to think about, one question maybe to pin down, is the perennial question of how tarot works. How does tarot work? And as I've already alluded to, there are various different ways of looking at this. There are some that will absolutely say there's nothing mysterious or magical happening, it's all happening inside yourself, and others who will say no, it's some kind of mystical, magical process that's happening. And in a sense, my view of the world is perhaps that both of those are right at the same time, and they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. So I've mentioned before on this channel that my view of the world is quite influenced, or very influenced, by non-dualism, non-dual thinking, non-dual philosophies, so direct path philosophies, Taoism, the kind of some elements of Buddhism. There's an English philosopher, he's dead now, he died, I think, sometime in the late 1990s, early 2000s, called Douglas Harding. And he was a chap who wrote a book called The Man with No Head. And what's fascinating about him is he, like many other modern philosophers and teachers who have or had a kind of non-dual perspective. So I'm thinking here about people like Eckhart Tolle, Byron Katie, Rupert Spira, Mooji, Gangaji, various people like that. Douglas Harding kind of came to his own approach to things, and he describes all this in his book, The Man with No Head. And he had a wonderful way of looking at himself, but any human being. And what he pointed out was that, we think of ourselves as being ourselves, a body, a person, with our thoughts and feelings and the circumstances that happen to us. And viewed from one perspective, the one that we're very close to, that of course is very true. And people very close to us might see us as not dissimilar to that. If you went way out into outer space, if you were an alien on another planet looking at the Earth, looking towards me, for example, you wouldn't see me. You would see, well, depending on how far out you were, you would see a galaxy. If you got a bit closer, you'd see a solar system. If you got a bit closer still, you'd see a planet. You'd see the planet Earth. If you got a bit closer still, you would see a human body, undifferentiated human body. If you went a bit closer still, that human body you would see is made up of cells. If you look even closer, you'll see that each of those cells is made up of a number of different molecules. Then you would see that those molecules are made up of atoms, and you keep going and going and going, you get into the energetic level, all the different energetic particles like quarks and bosons and all this kind of stuff. And then at some point, there's almost a nothingness, a kind of energetic soup. And yet at the heart of that, from my perspective, in me, there is a very real person. And in this person's world, everything exists. So I can look out of myself and see all those things from a different perspective. So I can see myself, and I can see the planet, I can see other people, I can see, etc., etc. And what Harding is trying to elucidate there in this model is that we are all of that. We are our personal selves, and we are our own unique experiences of the entirety of everything. And that's true of everyone. So it's not like any one person is more special than another. We are all one, but we all appear separate. And that's the fundamental tenet of non-duality. And in my perspective, tarot is a really useful tool for helping us to look at that aspect of ourselves from a number of different angles. And when you do a tarot reading, when you come to the tarot with a question or a problem or an issue you want to explore, and you do a reading, tarot acts as a mirror that encompasses all of that. The whole of reality, the whole of creation, the whole of human experience is encoded in the cards. And when those are reflected back at you, you are able to interpret your own position within that vastness of experience in a meaningful way. So that's kind of the broad philosophy I hold when I come to a tarot reading. Another thing to say about tarot and the way that it might work is the very famous theory by Carl Jung of synchronicity, the idea that there are things that meaningfully coincide. So in Jung's approach, he would say that when you do a tarot reading and you pull out the cards, when you pull out particular cards and you ask a particular question, the cards that come out when you ask that particular question are absolutely related, energetically we might say, to the quality of the moment that you ask the question and to the question itself. And people often say, by the way, people who are skeptics often say, but I can prove that that's not true, because I can ask the tarot a question and shuffle the cards and get a set of cards, and then a minute later I can ask the same question again, and I can shuffle the cards and I'll get entirely different cards. Now, on the one hand, of course, they're right. It is true that you can ask the same question multiple times and you'll get different cards each time. Possibly, usually, probably. But here's the thing. You're not asking the same question. If I ask the tarot a question and I pull cards, and then I ask the question again and pull cards, that second time I'm not asking the same question. I'm asking the tarot a different question. I'm asking, can you prove to me that you will be able to give me the same cards? Can you prove to me that I'm not just getting random cards? Can you prove that you actually work? So the moment you duplicate a question in an attempt to see if the tarot will give you the same answer, you're not asking the same question. So going back to synchronicity, is it a thing? Does it work? Does it only work with tarot? Well, the principle of synchronicity applies to any divinatory system. It also applies to things like astrology, etc. Again, my view is you could argue that, I'm looking at my desk at the moment, and I'm glad that the camera cannot see my desk because it is a mess. I would be ashamed to show it to you. There's clutter all over it. There are tarot decks, there are postcards, there are sticky labels, there's scrunched up tissues, there's pens, there's all kinds of things all over the desk. One could argue that the configuration of things on my desk at this particular moment in time are synchronous with this moment in time. And if I was to ask a question now and use my desk as a way of interpreting that question, I could perhaps encode some meaning into it. I could perhaps impute some meaning into the fact that I have my wallet here on the desk and it is obscured, it's hidden under a couple of books and a scrunched up envelope. What might that mean financially? I can look at the fact that I've got a pen which has got its top off and is almost certainly dried out now. What might that mean? I've got a lovely picture of my cat. What might that mean? So the quality of this moment could be inherently in the configuration of things on my desk, but because I don't commonly relate to them symbolically, I wouldn't necessarily interpret them, but I could. And that's the whole principle of any mantic approach of reading clouds, reading the formation of birds, reading entrails, reading the way the sticks fall in the I Ching, all that kind of stuff. You could do that with almost anything, but it's harder if you don't have a system or recognizable symbols to interpret. And the tarot, of course, provides us with a system of recognizable symbols, even if you go for the most simple interpretation of just the symbols, all the way through to the very in-depth esoteric interpretations of ceremonial magic and Kabbalah and astrology, etc., etc., etc. So if one goes along with the idea of synchronicity being a thing that helps us explain tarot, then that is absolutely a valid way of looking at the way that one can interpret tarot. And we can see why tarot would be a useful tool because of the meaningful symbols that are encoded into it. And so when we see those symbols forming different patterns in different readings, we have a ready-made invitation to interpret and dive deeper into meaning. But it's possible to have a worldview that says everything is connected. Everything in this moment is connected to everything else. Tarot just provides us with a gateway into that, an interpretive gateway where we can access meaning in a way that we might not easily do otherwise. So that's my take on synchronicity and tarot. By the way, I'm thinking of doing a series, another tarot series, and I thought I might do a series called Tarot is ... And it would be about diving into things like tarot is a tool for synchronicity, tarot is a game, tarot is an esoteric system, tarot is a mirror, tarot is a hologram. There's a whole host of things we could say tarot is, and dive into some thinking around that. So if that would be of interest to you, let me know and I'll seriously consider it, because I have some more to say on the subject. I'm going to close now because we're up to about half an hour. And I want to end really with this thought. I've said a lot about how I think tarot might work, how different systems work, etc., etc. The fact that different people have different interpretations. The question I'll leave you with is really, does any of that matter? Perhaps the most important question isn't, does tarot work? but is tarot useful? And only you can answer that question for yourself. Until next time, see you soon. Look after yourselves. Bye.